Nirmala ji, thank you so much for giving us this first budget interview to a streaming service and a private news channel. Through this interview, you will reach the length and breadth of the country through all our News 18 channels, CNBC TV 18, CNN News 18, News 18 India, and a slew of digital properties, moneycontrol.com, First Post, and news18.com. Thank you so much for this. My first question, this is your fifth budget. You were navigating two epochal events in the last couple of years. One was the ongoing pandemic and its impact, and the other was the war in Ukraine. What I would like to understand from you is what was going on in the mind of Nirmala Sitharaman, and how she was dealing with policy making in these last 5 historic years.
Starting with a very difficult question, because difficult not for any other reason but to capture the experiences, the as I say, anubhav, going through that, and also to look back at it now when you're probably slightly out of it. It's very difficult to describe in, let's say, a short brief answer.
I can understand.
But yet, if you have to really capture it, I had no precedent before me to handle such a situation. There were no given templates. There were no examples to follow. And there were no theories which would have worked in such context. So essentially, we were going by continuous conversation with all kinds of stakeholders. Those who have directly some thing to say about the industry and its suffering, MSME and its suffering, or even those who are observing it with a more discerning eye. So we had to engage in conversation continuously with all people, take their view, weigh it for ourselves to see which one is all right, which is more suitable for us, and which is not.
Yes.
And also take courage in saying it may not work out for us in one particular way, because eventually somewhere all this has got to be answerable. And therefore I think I would immensely recall the ways in which Honorable PM led the conversation with us. He would never tire himself from meeting us. He would never say not today. So with all necessary precautions taken for COVID, following the protocol, we would still meet and talk about things. But eventually, whatever has been at that time decided and put out as schemes, one thing which was not so much relevant for dealing with the pandemic itself, but yet had to be done, was not to let go the opportunity to continue the reform process.
Yes.
So that was carried on. But we may do so many things. We may have a stable leadership, clear-headed leadership which stands by us and gives us the guidance under the Prime Minister. And we may come up with the proposals and also launch some specific schemes at that time to benefit, to give relief and so on. Eventually it is the way in which the people of India have absorbed it all. Absorbed it and found best ways to go around it with this kind of a succor which is coming from the government, or some hand holding which is coming from the government. May not be adequate, but so the credit goes to the people of India for having so been in clued position with the government's every decision making, and kept pace with it all. And that is why today we are where we are. Entirely the way in which people of India have absorbed whatever has been done from the government side and put it to effect in the ground.
No, you make a very important point. I think you never gave up on reforms in the last so many years. Despite, come what may, pandemic, war in Ukraine, and that I must concede. I clearly remember that many experts and economists at that time panned the government, panned India, that we were not doing enough for stimulus in the COVID period. And I remember they cited examples of Western economies, European economies, saying that we should at least give 10 to 20% of GDP. That's the bare minimum we should do. Now, in hindsight, do you think that it was good to ignore that advice and be tight-fisted, and that is showing up today?
Yes, that is why in answering earlier your question, we had to do our homework for every such input which came in at that time. Why? We could have always said, no, this is what appeals to us, and we would have gone ahead. No, but we had to consider every such advice which came in, and also go through the depths of what it would mean, how will it be executed, whether it can really bear the results, and so on. Only because whether we choose one way or not, we should know why we have not chosen a particular way and be able to justify saying our understanding was this, and that's why we didn't take it. Today I have the advantage of looking back at it and say, good that I didn't take it, because the results would have been very different. Right. But the fact remains that we went through every one of the suggestions with equal open-mindedness and rigor.
So, Nirmala ji, if I look at this budget, coming to this budget, the central theme, and you've elaborated, you've articulated it in your speech subsequently as well, but I would still like to ask this question, that there is a big push to capital expenditure on one hand, on the other you've also given a lot of money into the hands of the middle class and the rich, so that there is a consumption boom. All this while keeping the fiscal discipline in place, as you had promised, 5.9%, so that's giving some comfort to everyone. What I want to understand is, what are the few outcomes, big outcomes that you're looking at from this budget?
If well executed, if the states and the center work together, I expect tourism to really see a sea change. Flow of people coming in both from one other states and also from abroad. It should actually be a good way of keeping the economy active. If that is going to be this year and also medium term, I also see the momentum that PM Vikas scheme is going to come up with. Because what it does, at least from the way in which I have done this work on understanding that scheme and to see how best it can be tailored, it touches that segment which is sort of self-employed, which has skills, which may be traditional skills, but which are very productively used, and that itself has a huge market, niche market of its own. If by launching PM Vikas, we will be able to touch upon a large section, not confined to any particular few castes which go by the description Vishwakarma, but we are including everybody who uses his hand with some tools, produces things. That's a huge layer which doesn't get covered under A scheme or B scheme or C scheme. Now we are touching them. We are actually giving that material difference of receiving better attention, better raw material, better marketing, better professionalized way of aggregation and so on, with better fair rated credit from bank and so on. I think that layer, which has remained unseen, untouched till now, but very recognized because of the quality of products that they produce, will now make a big difference to us. Equally, the push on green is not going to be any less. In every sector, there's been provisions made in the budget for them to do the transition from depending on fossil fuel to a renewable energy source based fuel. And that will touch every walk of life, not just farmers, not just women in household, both from the point of view of user and also producer. You will generate enough power for yourself and be able to also sell it. And the final but most important, I would think, is the way we are going to shake up and also give life to the self-help women's groups which exist in the rural parts of the country. Some states have extraordinarily done well on SHGs in the last few decades. It's not as if they have been formed only today. A couple of decades they've been on the ground. 81 lakh of them, groups, exist. And it is they who we are now trying to aggregate, bring them together like clusters, see what they want to do in terms of production or services. For instance, I just bring in a very private sector example. Lijjat, the papad,
Lijjat papad,
after all was a women's somewhat self-help group. Look at the kind of product, the quality, the branding, the perception about what is Lijjat can always be superior in quality. There's never a compromise on it, and people seek it, even though from the general papad pricing it is slightly higher in price, but still people prefer it. So like that, SHGs, and I don't want just to end with the papad making, it should be everything else also. So depending on the skill sets available, the raw material available, we want to make sure that SHGs do come in to benefit from government policy and also through digital marketing, run professionally as well.
That's interesting. You know, your budget was very well received by the markets. In fact, while you were speaking, the markets were really going up. But you know, the rout in the Adani stocks somewhat spoiled the party. You know, there is a general nervousness in the market. How does your government see this?
I look at the budget for having covered all the sections of the society. We've tried, and it has been a detailing that which has consumed a lot of time in preparation of this budget. The details is what has brought the difference in touching so many different sectors and segments of our society. We've got something on offer for each one of them. So therefore, if it's being received very well, I'm very glad. But of course, that motivates me to be able to now take it upon myself to better implement it down to the last person who's aimed at. So I would think the impact of the budget, the immediate impact of the budget on the market, and subsequent to, let's say, for whatever reason it trailed back, I think in the next few days the budget's impact will still continue to hold the markets high.
You know, the opposition is taking aim at your government, saying that the banking and insurance companies have large exposure in Adani stocks. You know, and the investors and the broader market is looking to you for some direction on this issue. Is our banking and insurance system resilient to take this shock?
I want to recall the words, you know, coming from the horse's mouth has greater credibility. Both the SBI and LIC have issued detailed statements. And I know the chairperson or the CMD has himself come out and explained how they are not overexposed or whatever they said, and also said, look, we are sitting over profits for the exposure that we have, which is well within the limit. That's what I understand they have said, and I've again read it through the media. They have very clearly said that their exposure is very well within the permitted limits, and that they are, even now with the valuation falling as well, they are still sitting over profit. So if that is the horse's mouth, as I refer to, word from the horse's mouth, but in general, both with the RBI, we do have the Financial Stability Board's meeting, which happens once in 6 months. We meet, even recently we have met. So I can only very clearly say, both the RBI and we, because of the FSB's meeting, Financial Stability Board's meeting, know that the Indian banking system, if anything, at this stage, for me to use this word, I want to use it with a sense of responsibility, like having gone through the twin balance sheet problem. Indian banking sector today is at a comfortable level, with their NPAs coming down to absolutely low levels, recovery is happening, and their position is very sound, which gets reflected in the fact that when they go to raise monies in the market, they are absolutely comfortably raising monies as well. So the entire macroeconomic analysis which any expert would do also highlights the fact that how comfortable the Indian banks are placed in. That cannot be that if they are at risk.
Some of the global investors as well, as a knee-jerk reaction, seem to have pulled out some money in the last couple of days. Some have put, fresh investments on hold. What would your message be to the global investors?
India remains as before an absolutely well-governed, stable government and also very well, regulated financial market. And as a result, I think the investor confidence which existed before shall continue even now. Our regulators are normally very, very stringent about certain governance practices, and therefore they should, one instance, however much talked about globally it may be, I would think is not going to be indicative of how well Indian financial markets are governed. So many lessons have been learned over the decades, and therefore I think our regulators have kept our market well in prime and prim condition.
Thank you. That's very reassuring coming from the Finance Minister. Let me move on to the next question around the budget, and this is to do with the economy. The current, is the current recovery due to pent-up demand, or do you think that this will be sustained?
I think it will be sustained because the pent-up demand argument was very right nearly 4-5 quarters ago, when post the Omicron we were coming back. People thought 2022 festival season was driven by revenge shopping, yes, pent-up demand and so on. But that pent-up demand won't stretch itself for more than one season if you want to, take it that way. 2022 festival season was in its normal course and there was no exaggeration in the markets or even in consumption. So I think it has now reached a level where it will sustain itself.
No, I asked this question also because the rural demand is still tepid. Looking at the commentary coming from FMCG companies in India. Also, if we look at, the work under the Manrega scheme and the, and FMCG results, I asked this question in this context as well. Can aggregate demand be more robust?
I'm sure you observe the Indian economy as well, yes, in all its great detail. Demand doesn't remain stable and then it doesn't remain only going upward. It does come down sometimes and does go up some other times. In fact, at that time during the pandemic, even during the lockdown, most of us felt the rural demand is very high, and what could explain it? We thought that the farm outputs were very good, and as a result they were having quite a few money in their hand and therefore they were able to sustain it. So that happens soon after the harvest. But rural demand even today, in terms of the people who are in the farm equipment manufacturing areas, are quite comfortable with what is going on in the rural market. It's not as if demand has affected them. So people are purchasing equipments to do their tilling or farming activities. That's one. I'm not just talking about tractors, but even the other equipments which go in. One. And second, also rural demand, which is FMCG related or your daily consumption related items. Your GST revenues, whilst I don't want to say that revenue GST going up is purely on rural, it may be urban and rural, but it means that it cannot be maintaining a sustained level if one of the segments, rural or urban, really fall down drastically. So I don't think it's worrisome, if at all, any drop.
The RBI governor says that the worst of inflation is behind.